Hello, this is Kathy Garner with Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation Service. We handle hawks, owls, falcons, eagles, ducks, egrets, herons, geese, and all wild mammals such as bobcats, foxes, raccoons, tree squirrels, opossums, and deer. If you have any of those, please feel free to leave your name and all of your phone numbers. Thank you for calling.
Dusk approaches night on a warm summer evening as Terry Williams drives towards the bank of the San Joaquin River. It's a trip she's made many times as a volunteer for the Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation Service. Her mission is to release 4 black-crowned night herons into their natural environment. Accompanied by her son Chris, Terry carries the cage to the river's edge. And there the herons discover their new home. The herons are released at night because they're nocturnal birds. Terry will have to leave them in the dark so that they can adjust to their new surroundings. For the last 3 months, the heron's home has been Terry's home. Terry's bathtub, that is. These hatchlings were part of a heron nesting community, or rookery, where the trees were illegally cut down by a landowner in Clovis. To mimic their upcoming wilderness diet, Terry must feed fish and mice to the infants 3 times a day. These herons are different from the great blue heron that Terry once cared for when she was in college. The great blue tosses its fish into the air before catching and eating it. Terry recalls the mistake she made by trying to feed fish with the heads cut off.
So he tosses it up and grabs it, and he doesn't swallow it. And he tosses it up and grabs it, and he doesn't swallow it. Tosses it. He did that about 40 times, and I'm going, what is the problem? And then I realized that their cue to the head is coming towards me is the eyeball. They just see the eyeball, and once that eyeball comes down first, they swallow. But there were no eyeballs, and so there was no swallowing, and he just did it over and over and over, and he would not eat those. I had to go and hunt up fish that actually had heads on them before he would eat again.
This cage in Terry's backyard houses herons that have progressed from the bathtub to a larger area where they can get stronger. Terry says that her backyard animals get minimum human contact to help prepare them for their upcoming release. Terry has also returned some bobcats to the wild. These young bobcats were rescued from around local foothill areas. They appear to be semi-tame now from being bottle raised. Like those bobcats that came before them, they will be completely wild by the time they're released. Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation never releases tame wildlife that could be potentially dangerous to humans. The bobcats and herons are just a few of the many animals Terry has released during her 32 years with Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation. Volunteers like Terry are trained and licensed to rescue, care for, and release animals. Terry recalls the release of a golden eagle after the bird had been illegally trapped and then rehabilitated.
We took it out and we let it go, and it just soared off. It was the most beautiful thing. Soared off over this hill, and right from behind the hill comes its mate. And they were so excited. It was just like puppies. They came around and they circled and they called and they talked to each other. And it was fabulous to see that not only had we released this one golden eagle, but this is a golden eagle that had a mate. And then just that year, later in the season, I saw baby goldens right there. So it was like, you see, it's almost like your grandchildren. It's very exciting.
Like Terry, Eileen Sutterfield uses her backyard to rehabilitate native birds. Feeders hanging from trees are invitations for hummingbirds that she's cared for to hang around after their release. Having the highest metabolic rate of any living thing, the bird's wings are a blur even when the speed is slowed down 10 times, as seen here. The aviary in Eileen's backyard has been the home to hundreds of hummingbirds. For 22 years as a volunteer to Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation, Eileen has cared for a variety of animals, but for the last 10, she has specialized in hummingbirds. Insects provide the natural protein diet for the birds. Eileen, meanwhile, provides the imitation nectar.
If you leave the old stuff up, they tend to get fungal infections in their mouth. So, anyway, hummingbird rescue.
Eileen has cared for 6 different species of hummingbirds. Immediately prior to their release, they're housed in the large section of the aviary that mimics their upcoming natural surroundings. Prior to that, they're kept in the smaller cages where the bird's strength and diet can be more easily monitored. Most of the hummingbirds turned over to Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation are new hatchlings that folks have found abandoned on the ground. A newly hatched hummingbird is not easy to care for, as it requires feeding every 15 minutes from sunup to sundown for up to 3 weeks.
So that means when you go to the grocery store, they go to the grocery store. You go to a doctor's appointment, they go to the doctor. You go to the dentist, they go to the dentist.
Debbie Eldred, a very dedicated volunteer, rehabilitates many different species of wildlife at her home. Here she's showing a fully grown pygmy owl that was injured when it flew into a window pane. But on several occasions, she's also ventured into the Sierra foothills to release gray foxes that she's rehabilitated. Accompanied by volunteers Ruth Charnin and Dana Tuckenstein, Debbie is about to release 3 gray foxes turned over 3 months ago to Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation by the Central California SPCA. The CCSPCA turns over fox kits to Fresno Wildlife that have been brought to them, perhaps by farmers disking fields or construction workers laying new foundations, who inadvertently destroy the dens.
Okay, honey, let's talk.
Look at her. She's like, woohoo, atta girl. Wave goodbye. Isn't that neat?
Just a few weeks prior to releasing these foxes, Debbie joined other Fresno wildlife volunteers northeast of Fresno to release barn owls. Orphaned owlets found in various locations and rehabilitated from newly hatched to teenage stages have been brought here for several weeks to acclimate to outdoor conditions and gain flight strength prior to their release. Since the owls are extremely good at what they do, which is to maneuver silently through the night and catch their prey, it takes good reflexes and quick reaction time just to catch the birds. Covering the owl's eyes helps to calm the bird while volunteers prepare him for release.
We have the only federal banding permit practically left in the valley. So we want to know, because we want to know if they're found, whether we're successful. Some of them have been found 6-7 years later, 10 years later, so we know that they're making it. Okay, are you right or left-handed?
Right.
Okay.
The instructor for this owl release is Kathy Garner, who, with the love and support from her husband Dave, founded Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation 37 years ago. She estimates that over 30,000 animals have passed through their home.
Now I want you to take your hand and put it on top of my hand. Okay, just like that. Perfect. Okay, do not let go. Keep your arms stretched out away from your body, and in that position I want you to walk out that way. And I want you to do the biggest volleyball toss you've ever done in your life.
Straight up ahead.
Straight up.
Just like that.
Straight up.
Unfortunately, you weren't here for this.
Straight up. Good job.
I know. Straight up and let go. Yeah. It was starting to do it again.
The CCSPCA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, California Department of Fish and Game, other law enforcement groups, government agencies, and individuals call Fresno Wildlife when they need the organization's help. Then volunteers are called to rescue and rehabilitate the animals.
We got a call from the highway patrolman once, and he called me up and he said, I think you need to meet me. And I said, where are you? And he gave me the street, and I said, and why am I meeting you? And he said, because someone just ran their car into a palm tree and 6 baby owls fell out, and they're sitting on the side of the road, and you need to come get them. He says, and I'm busy sighting the person right now. So we went and we picked up the baby barn owls and off we went. But, you just never know.
In 1974, Kathy was an active docent with the Chaffee Zoo, and along with her young daughter was involved with the Fresno Junior Museum. Both organizations decided that year to cease taking in and caring for orphaned native species.
At that same point, I was involved with probably 5 or 6 other people that were heavily involved at the zoo, and we became concerned when we heard from the Department of Fish and Game that since there were no active rehabs and no facilities, no licensed rehabbers, that all the animals, whether they were healthy or not, were being euthanized in mass. They were just babies that were totally whole and healthy, and their only problem was that they were orphaned.
Kathy was surprised when her state and federal applications for licenses to rehabilitate native wildlife were approved, because her educational background was in music and psychology.
I asked my husband before I applied, and he said, well, what's involved? And I said, oh, I'm not that much, just a few animals a year. And his comment, which he's probably living every day to regret, he says, well, how bad can it be? So he said, sure, go ahead. And now we take in between 400 and 1,200 animals a year. And it's a lot bigger than we had ever expected.
In addition to rehabilitating animals and returning them to the wild, Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation strives to educate others about the animals in schools, club meetings, and other community events. Here, for example, at a stop on the Fresno Art Hop Tour, Fresno Wildlife members are on hand to talk about some of the permanent education animals. They include Ruth Charnin, who cares for a western screech owl that was blinded when it flew into a car. Joey Napoli, a Clovis West High School graduate, asked to be the permanent caregiver of an American kestrel that had been placed in Joey's environmental science class. Elizabeth Bates cares for a sharp-shinned hawk that suffered a neurological injury. Mary Brent provides a home for a saw-whet owl that was found with a wing injury. Russell McLaughlin cares for an injured Swainson's hawk. During a Fresno Wildlife Kids Day event at Duncan Ceramics, Howard McLaughlin explains the characteristics and virtues of an opossum to a mother and her daughter. While more than 85% of the animals treated by Fresno Wildlife are returned to the wild, some must be euthanized. Others, such as these, are used for educational purposes. They all have conditions that prevent them from being released back into the wild. Those who were drawn to look for treasures at the Clovis Antique Fair also found themselves captivated by the animals at the Fresno Wildlife Display. Among the volunteers is Diane Ganner, who credits the wildlife organization for her success.
When I started here, I was going to school at Reedley College, and I didn't know anything about birds of prey, and I'm dyslexic, and I was reading below second grade level. I was afraid to talk to people. They put a bird in my hand, and that changed my life tremendously.
Today, as a Forest Service naturalist and Fresno wildlife volunteer, Diane speaks to thousands of people annually in campfire programs, club meetings, schools, and special events.
And I wouldn't have been able to do this if it wasn't for this organization.
Kathy is quick to praise the volunteers who make events like this one happen, and those who rescue and rehabilitate animals for release.
And we're very proud. This organization could never run without those people, the people that are there whenever we need them. And it reminds me of the old days when I used to be able to call some of the college kids that were involved, and it could be 10 o'clock at night and I'd say, somebody says that there's an eagle down at Lost Lake, and they go, we're putting on our gear right now, we'll be out there in a half an hour. It was just the best.
Fresno wildlife volunteers are spread throughout the San Joaquin Valley, and for the organization's 37 years of existence, they've had no central location to call home. But through the foresight and generosity of the city of Clovis, property has been set aside for the Nature, Education, and Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. It could one day become a major attraction in the valley, with a wildlife hospital, natural history museum, park and education classrooms, the home of Fresno Wildlife Rehabilitation Service. Now, however, the property remains empty. With your support, the first phase of construction will include a wildlife hospital, patterned after this one at the Lindsay Wildlife Museum in